that to me is fascinating, and it's such an existential challenge. How do we do that as a planet? How do we do right by people who are not as fortunate as us, who are still in some ways living in a 19th century world, but do it in a way that we don't bankrupt the whole planet?
Hi, and welcome to Indian Explorers. In this podcast, we talk about Indian success stories. I'm Sabrina, and together with my co host Amit, we will get to understand the journey of our guests and what drives them. The optimism, patience, idealism, and courage, these are their attributes that we want to bring to life in our conversations with them. If you enjoyed this show, please hit the subscribe button and share it with others. Hello. I have a
Good
question for
morning.
you today. I'm going right into it.
All right. I like the energy.
Yeah. Do you nap? Do you take naps?
I I try and avoid them because if I do, then that night at 1:30, 2:30, 3:30 in the morning, I'm like, shit, get me sleep. So, and I try and
Okay.
avoid them. But I think
Okay.
they're great. If you're disciplined and you do these 20, 30-minute naps, I think
Yeah.
it helps very much in terms of your focus.
See,
Why'd you ask?
I take, well, if I have the time to take a nap, it can't be less than an hour. I just can't wake up. But Noel takes 20-minute like decompression naps and he's like rejuvenated.
Yeah. My dad
And
does the same.
oh, my dad is like a napper. I think it's a Noel Rye thing.
I think Jeff Bezos naps as well. So I think it's a
Okay, well,
successful thing.
a lot of companies now, I mean, we knew Google had those pods, those
Yes.
sci-fi-esque
Yeah.
pods.
With the
But
big curves. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of companies now are allowing for naps, 20 to 30-minute naps during the day, and not just Western companies, but also, European companies, Asian companies, they're all allowing for naps because of
Productivity.
productivity. I didn't realize US sustains economic losses of $411 billion a year because of sleep deprivation. 50 to 70 million Americans have sleep disorders. That's a lot.
I mean, it's a big thing. What is that thing that people take before they sleep? Melatonin?
And there's melatonin, there's Ambien, there's
Yeah.
so many now.
So people are hooked on that and they don't sleep without it. I sleep with white noise because I sleep next to
Oh,
one
oh, because the
baby,
boys. Yeah,
and then another kid comes during the night. So
right.
sometimes I wake up and the people I'm sleeping next to in the room, they weren't there when I slept.
So the reason I brought this up was because I saw an article about World Sleep Day, which was last month, and people, if you were visiting Mexico City in downtown, there were hundreds of people on blue like yoga mats taking a nap during the middle of the day, and it was like a day to promote
Hmm.
sleep and proper sleep because of all the benefits you get from sleep. So,
I mean,
um,
think
pretty
about it.
interesting.
A third of our life, we sleep.
Yeah. And think about the nights now that you don't sleep well. I mean, the next day it's like, I'm miserable.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I agree with you.
Yeah. So would you implement a nap day in your company or a nap
No,
time?
no, I wouldn't. I feel like my staff are half asleep anyway, so I don't think napping's going to help.
Okay. So
Uh,
what keeps you up at night from sleeping? Anything lately?
there are two things that keep me up at night. I must admit.
Oh, I didn't know you
Uh,
were going to answer something.
no, I mean normally I'm an optimistic, happy kind of guy, but there are two
Hmm.
things that I am worried about in life. Um, they're very different. The first is that one day we'll all be gone because of a nuclear attack. Um, could
That's
even
been
be an
worrying you
accident.
lately?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
The fact that we're putting Putin in a corner and Putin has actually used the word nuclear in a speech.
yeah.
The fact that we at any given time, America and Russia and North Korea and India and Pakistan all have nuclear missiles
Right.
aimed at each other. Yeah, it's something I think about because All it takes is one crazy man and one crazy
Of
moment,
course. Yeah.
and that's done. And did you know that if a nuclear missile aimed at the US is launched, Biden or the president, whoever that may be, has 6 minutes to uh, decide to deploy?
Oh, I didn't know that. What do you mean?
No?
Oh, okay. They have 6 minutes once it's,
Basically, what happens? Okay, a nuclear missile leaves Russia
yeah, you have
or North
six
Korea.
minutes to decide if you're going to attack.
Okay, so if a nuclear missile leaves Russia, it takes 25 to 35 minutes to hit America, depending
Mm-hmm.
on where in Russia it goes and whether it's East Coast, West Coast, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you got 30 minutes, say on average. In those 6 minutes, first of all, a satellite detects it and a call gets put to the Secretary of Defense. And
Mm-hmm.
the Secretary of Defense then has another call from somebody local, like not a satellite, but someone in a local office. So it takes two offices to verify that this is a missile attack. That
Right.
happens within 30 seconds.
Right.
A Secretary of Defense gets a call, and then he has to inform the President of America,
Right. Right.
right? And the President has 6 minutes to actually deploy um that missile back
Okay.
to back to the country where that first missile was launched from, right? Now, if it's a mistake and Biden launches that missile from a submarine, if you launch it from a submarine, it doesn't take 6 minutes, it takes 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But once you launch a missile from a submarine, there's no recourse. You can't call it back or you can't switch it
Okay.
off,
Okay.
right? If you launch it from a land,
Land.
there
Uh-huh.
are there are recourses where you can actually call it back or make it land somewhere else,
Okay.
right? So in those 6 minutes, the pressure is on. Do you remember a couple of months ago when your Secretary of Defense, what's his name, the black guy, Lloyd,
Mm-hmm.
Austin Lloyd or something, where he was out of reach for 5 days because he was in hospital.
Oh,
It
right.
was in
Right.
the
Right.
news.
Yes.
It was in the
Yes.
news 2 months ago, right?
Yes. Correct. In December, I
Correct. So
believe.
it became a big deal because for those 5 days, if an attack happened to America and the Secretary of Defense is not able to reach the president,
Yeah.
who's in control,
Yeah.
right?
I'm
He's
sure
still
they had that planned out. I think the media,
well.
blew that a little out of proportion. You don't think the
So
Secretary
apparently,
of Defense has a plan?
so he told the chief of staff,
Yeah.
right? But he didn't put somebody in charge to make that call. He should have
I'm sure
resigned
there was.
his, well, not formally, and not top of the American people or the press.
Yeah.
And in America, as a democracy, that's what's expected.
We need to know everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so that keeps
Well,
me up
great.
at
You know
night.
a lot about the timing and everything. I mean, this is really on your mind.
I mean, it's something I'm worried about because in 5 minutes you got to call and say bye to everybody, right? Or your loved ones, right? That's serious. It's serious. I don't know why I'm laughing. So that's one
I
thing
don't
that
know why
keeps me
I'm
up at night.
laughing. I think
Yeah,
because I've never known you to be worried about things. And
yeah. So that's the the nightmare scenario that keeps me up at night. But
okay.
the thing that keeps me up more at night regularly, and the last 3 to 6 months, like it's something I think about, is I actually think my kids might be unemployed. Like I
Okay.
think the way AI is developing, um, I'm not scared about the factory worker anymore, or McDonald's substituting the people who makes French fries with a robot. I'm more worried about white collar jobs, lawyers, doctors, marketing people, salespeople. I feel like the skill sets that the AI robots are going to do in the future are so
Mm-hmm.
much better and more advanced than what my kids are learning in school for sure. That
Right.
I genuinely think the unemployment levels that we have today are going to triple and quadruple in developed economies. And I know there are going to be new jobs and new things that we don't know
Right. That's what I
today,
was going to say. Mm-hmm.
for sure, for sure. But I still think that we're not equipping our children with the right education and curriculum and
Mm-hmm.
skills for what's happening for right in front of our eyes. And that worries the shit out of me.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to say. I haven't really put much thought into.
I can give you examples if you want me to go into it.
Go for it. I mean, it's keeping you up at night. The vent, let it out.
No, I mean, I feel like I feel like, we're learning things like algebra and quadratic equations and history, which is obviously important.
Yeah.
And but like in our school, teamwork, presentation of skills, confidence building,
Hmm.
even like cleaning. In Japan, the students clean the classroom, including the toilets, right?
Wow.
I think that's such an amazing thing. Why aren't
Yeah.
we teaching our kids about cleanliness? You
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
investing, stock market, negotiating, uh, meditation,
I was just thinking the other
stretching.
day how to file your taxes or what tax forms are. That's such
Yeah,
a big one. The other day Naima had to do a project like build out of clay a landform, so a plateau. And I
yeah,
was like, so obviously I have to help her. And I'm like, why are we wasting time? Just learn what a plateau is and let's move on, to
yeah.
something more educational or useful, right?
How a car works, changing the tire of a car.
Changing a tire, changing a battery.
Sex education is pathetic.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
you know, and nowadays people are learning sex from porn, so
yeah,
they're learning the wrong things,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's
So,
funny. That's
I mean, I
true.
could go on and on and on, but I think Sabrina, let's be optimistic. Let's bring on our guest, because really we could have an whole episode about what's wrong with our schools today.
Well, let's see what he has to say about AI because he is an economic genius. So let's bring him on.
Let's bring him on.
So excited to introduce Jaideep Prabhu. He is a writer, consultant, and the director of the Center for India and Global Business at Judge Business School in Cambridge. He specializes in marketing, innovation, strategy, and international business. His research delves into how innovation can be fostered in both emerging and developing economies, with a keen focus on frugal innovation. He co authored a book entitled Frugal Innovation: How to Do More with Less, that has received widespread acclaim. His thought leadership extends beyond the boardroom, advocating for socially inclusive and environmentally sustainable approaches to innovation that address pressing global challenges. Welcome, Jaideep. How are you?
Thank you so much, Sabrina. I'm very well. Wonderful to be with both of you here.
Hi,
Yes.
Jaideep. How are
Hi,
you?
Amit.
Where are you, Jaideep? I can hear some background noise. I guess you're not in
Yes,
Cambridge today.
I'm not in Cambridge. I'm actually in India, in Bangalore, to be precise. It's evening time, but nevertheless, there's traffic. There's the usual sounds of India coming through the window, which I've had to leave open because it's about 37 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees Fahrenheit out there.
Wow.
Something like a heat wave happening at the
That's
moment.
not normal for this time of year, is it?
Well, Bangalore in particular is known to be the air conditioned city. This is why it's so attractive to a lot of foreign companies that are based here. And that's because when it does get hot, typically the hot air rises and the cool air comes in. But that's not happening at the moment. One wonders why. Um, and generally speaking, this is the warmest part of the year, but it
But,
seems hotter than usual.
but what
Okay.
about the actual electric air conditionings?
So I haven't turned the actual electric air conditioner on, partly because you didn't need one in the past. There are fans in I'm in my parents' home, which has fans, and they have one air conditioner because that's all you really needed. On the few
Okay.
days when it got hot, you turn it on. But now
Yeah,
that's happening more and more often. That it's getting really hot, and you probably really need air conditioning.
I had the same thing in Chile. The apartment had no air conditionings. I put two in the hall, two in the bedroom, and even the kids' bedroom now has an AC. Now my maid, my nana wants an AC in her room.
Why not? Yeah.
Why not? Why not? Before JD, before we talk about your book and what it is you do in Cambridge, I have a I have something that I want your opinion on, if you don't
Yeah.
mind.
Sure.
Since you are, from Cambridge in the UK, my sister, my sister's son, has gone to study in one of the top universities in the UK, but or not but and he is studying Spanish and Portuguese.
Oh, wow.
So I had a fight with my sister because I'm kind of shit scared that AI is going to take all the white collar jobs, and that we need to develop skill sets or computer science, coding, maths. And then she said, no, in the UK, people value languages and people value where you went to study. Like, and I'm fighting with her saying, people don't give a shit anymore, even if you go to Harvard or Stanford or Yale. It's about the
Mm-hmm.
skill sets that you acquire. And so, you being where you are in your position, what do you think about your children going to study Spanish and Portuguese in an era where I can actually speak Spanish to somebody in Brazil and they will get my voice in Portuguese? They will speak back in Portuguese and I will hear it in Spanish. So, are you on my side or my sister's side, and why? Let's start there.
Wow. Wow, this is a very good question to get
Question.
started with. This is sort of the question for so many reasons, you know. It's a good question to be asking someone who's in a university that question, because we ask ourselves that question all the time. What should we
We
be
want the
teaching our
answer.
students?
We want the answer.
I don't know if I have the answer. That's the challenge, because
Your
we
opinion?
okay, so here we go. One is, I would say it's really good to study languages, because that is a really human thing. That's how humans communicate with each other and also with machines, as it turns out. So, if you have a grasp over how language works and you can use it well, that's always a wonderful skill to have. And if you know more than two or three languages, you have that skill in multiple parts of the world, and particularly Spanish and Portuguese. Because I don't think you know this, but my wife she teaches Spanish in the University of Cambridge, and she'd be delighted to
Hmm.
hear what you say.
My
Now,
sister already likes you.
yeah, now the challenge there with that particular statement I just made is that often her students go and work in the city of London, which is finance. So they're not directly applying their language, but nevertheless they get jobs in the city of London. And so I would imagine that when they apply, they get those jobs for two reasons. One is that they went to the University of Cambridge, and second, that they studied language or languages. So I think my opinion and my belief would be that those are the kinds of things that will help us differentiate ourselves from AI. I've heard people who are in computer science also say this, that coding is something that Chat GPT could do for you. It could
Mm-hmm.
tell you, it could code, and it could correct your code. It could, do programming. So what you really need is to know what needs to be done, and that requires creativity, it requires lateral thinking, it requires empathy. These are what we would
Yeah.
regard as truly human skills, and language teaches that. It's about communication. You need to be able to put yourself in the place of the other, to be able to understand what they're saying, to be able to listen, all these kinds of things.
If
Mm-hmm.
only my sister could articulate it the same way you've just done, maybe the fight would have been a bit shorter. All right, Sabrina, you start.
Tell us about yourself. Did you grow up in India?
Yes, I did. I spent the first 21 years of my life here. I lived
Okay.
in various parts of the country. And then I did a bachelor's in engineering, a very
Okay.
typical choice, before I went to the States.
Oh, where in the States were you?
I went to LA. I went to the University of Southern California. And initially, I went to study engineering. And then I switched to the business school and got my PhD in marketing. So that's my area.
Yeah, which we're going to delve into right now.
Yeah. So, you know, everything I read about you was about frugal innovation and Jugaad. Can you explain in your words what Jugaad means? Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Correctly, absolutely. So Jugaad is a very Hindi word. It's a very Indian word. It's not just a Hindi word. It's also used in Urdu and Punjabi. And it's a word that's used to describe something that all Indians do pretty much all the time, which is how to think of a creative way of dealing with challenges. And these could be in your daily life. How you're going to get from point A to point B in heavy traffic when there's no public transport, and maybe something happened to your car or scooter or whatever. How do you get something done?
So,
To
so would the English word be that I'm looking at shortcuts? Would Jugaad
Shortcuts
be
is a
shortcuts?
short,
Creative, right?
but
Creative? That's what I
yeah,
was thinking.
there's an element of ingenuity.
Yeah.
Uh, so it could be an improvised hack. That's another way of thinking about it. A way of getting around obstacles, a way of uh, achieving your goals. There's also an element of doing it frugally or with limited resources, because often you are trying to solve your problem or achieve your goal with limited resources in a country like India.
Got it. So why does this topic interest you so much? Because the amount of
Yes,
research you've done into this,
yes,
like it seems to be a little bit more than passion.
yes. So, well, I have to say that I didn't initially consider studying this topic at all. I mean, when I went to the US, and this was 89 and I was doing my PhD, you know, people in the West, if they had heard of India, they would only talk about India when something bad happened. It would be in the news because there was an earthquake or a
Mhm.
cyclone or people died of starvation or some horror
This
story.
is 89. What
This
era?
is 89.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
because
And
90s it was all about BPO and outsourcing.
well, yeah. So in the 90s, the narrative changed a bit, and India sort of came on the sort of map. But still, my career initially was entirely focused on studying what happened in large Western corporations. So I studied innovation, I studied R&D, and I studied it in high-tech sectors like pharmaceuticals, banking, etc., in large Western corporations, because the understanding was that's where innovation happens. People would have laughed at me if I said that I was going to study India. What would you have studied? What aspect of business would you have studied that others
Mhm.
would want to know about? And
Tatas,
Mhm.
Reliance,
Yes,
Tata
so
and
there
Reliance.
was some, but
Yeah,
keep in mind that India was still a closed economy till 91.
correct.
So when I left, India was still command and control. It was followed the Soviet model of centralized planning. A lot of things were done by the state. There was import substitution, so there's not much trade going on.
Yeah,
And this was even though pretty much all our neighbors on the east of us, including China, and of course there were the Asian tigers, and before that Japan, had followed a very different model. India remained true to its original socialist principles. And India
yeah.
only opened up its economy in 91. So Indian business, in a sense, only came into its own in the 90s, and really only towards the end of the 90s and into the 2000s. And that is when I began to study India in a more serious way. There were things to study. And because I'd studied these large Western multinationals, what I'd noticed was that in the late 90s and 2000s, these large Western multinationals had started to set up very big captive R&D centers in both China and India. And that was really interesting, because even though in the late 20th century, companies had offshored manufacturing to China and back office stuff like BPO to India, they had kept R&D, which is a strategic asset, close to home, close to headquarters. So if they did R&D in another country, it would be in a so-called triad country, the countries of Western Europe, North America, and Japan, because that's
Okay,
where all the research was happening, and that's where you had control over the intellectual property. And that began to change in the 2000s, and that's how I began to study India in a serious way.
okay. So
Okay.
let's go back a little bit. So 91, briefly, are we talking about when Chidambaram and Deepak Parekhs of the world came in and saw what was happening in the West, and we got institutional investors from the West? Is that the era we're talking about?
No, Chidambaram and Deepak Parekh come later. So in 91, what happened was India was about a week away from defaulting on its foreign obligations. It had very little foreign direct investment. It didn't have dollars in its treasury. And so it was about to ship some of its gold to foreign countries to be able to pay off its debts.
Yeah.
And that's when the IMF and World Bank came in with a rescue package, but the condition was that India do reforms. And the prime minister at that time was a gentleman called P.V. Narasimha Rao, and he had a finance minister called Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was a PhD in economics from Cambridge,
I remember
and
him
had
very
been
well.
and he had been the head of the Reserve Bank. So he knew his economics, and they realized this was their moment to do the reforms that would have been very hard to do otherwise, and which would then have put us on a trajectory that China had been on for about 10 years. And so they took that opportunity, and they had these sort of across the board reforms that they did. Liberalization, they opened up internal markets to competition, made it easier for companies to get set up and break the monopoly of some of the big companies. They did all kinds of reforms to the financial services sector, and they also did reforms to foreign direct investment and trade. They opened up the economy, and that set India on a different trajectory altogether.
And look where we are today.
I know.
Yes. And that's when, the growth began to happen. But, and India has done very well. So India has, been growing at upwards of 5% on average, some years more, some years just around there, since then. However, China was growing faster. And so, if we go back to 1978, when China began its reforms, India and China at that point were neck and neck. GDP total and GDP per capita were about the same. But China began its reforms in 1978, opening up to foreign direct investment, manufacturing in a big way, export led growth. Those 10 years that China did that and India didn't, India got left behind. And India
They kicked our
didn't.
ass.
Hmm?
They kicked our ass.
Absolutely.
Literally.
And
Yeah.
and not just in that period, but they were able to then set up the foundations for a developed economy, which is through manufacturing. So they became the factory of the world, and India missed that opportunity. And India's growth from 91 has been led by services, not manufacturing. And
Sure.
it has
Tech.
been jobless growth. That's the big problem. And India is still struggling to achieve that kind of manufacturing. Manufacturing only accounts for something like 90%, 19%, sorry, of
Well,
India's GDP.
agriculture is too big, right? Still.
Agriculture still remains big, and agriculture is the problem is that it's low productivity and it's very hard to increase productivity. So
Yeah.
all countries that have developed have moved people from agriculture into manufacturing, and India has not been able to do that.
Yeah.
I want to ask about more about frugal innovation, right? Doing more with less. And when I started reading about this, I thought, well, isn't that common sense, right? Doing more than less. But then I read about Kodak. As soon as Kodak came out, it clicked. I was like, oh my gosh, it's human nature not to want to change, right? If it's not broke, don't fix it, right? So what is the psychology behind it?
And I want
That's such a wonderful.
examples. Give us
Yes,
some
and
examples.
yeah, so that's such a wonderful question. And that's the heart of the matter because you'd think that it would be logical and natural to do more and better with less. That's what innovation and ingenuity are all about. And in fact, all the big breakthroughs in our history, and particularly from the Industrial Revolution onward, have been about that. But what tends to happen in large corporations, you gave the example of Kodak, and we could look at any large corporation, is that, and particularly in the West, the model is to invest a lot of money into R&D. You have big teams, big budgets focused on long-term projects where often they're trying to push the technology frontier for the sake of doing that. And then companies will come up with some new technology that they'll put into their products to differentiate them from the competition. And
Okay.
then, because that whole process is so expensive and consumers are affluent, they charge for it. So the business model is we will have fat margins on our innovations. And even if the volumes are thin, we'll make a profit. And then over time, we might reduce the margins and grow the pie. And we'll still only focus on the affluent consumers in the West, and then maybe we'll look at emerging markets later, and it'll trickle down to those countries. So that's the dominant model. That was the dominant model until emerging markets started to grow, particularly the big ones in Asia and Latin America. Then the whole logic gets turned on its head because in countries like China and India, the mass of the market of people cannot afford those fat margins. So your margins have to be razor thin, but you make your profit on the volumes. So the
Right.
model gets turned on its head. Now you ask for examples. Let me give you an example. I always start my talk sometimes with this fridge. I show a high-end fridge, and I'll say, "Look, this is the type of innovation we might see in an affluent society. You know, it's a fridge that you can talk to, and it'll talk back to you through a tablet PC. And for that pleasure, you pay $3,000." Now, in a
LG and
country like,
Samsung have that.
yeah, and
Sure.
they have that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and frankly, you might see those in India too, in the cities, in the rich households.
Mm-hmm.
But in India, you're equally likely to see a $30 clay fridge made by someone in a village in, say, Gujarat. It's a box made of clay using an ancient principle of when water evaporates through a clay pot, it drops the temperature, could drop it by about 8 degrees Celsius in a hot, dry climate. He took that principle of a matka, which is a clay pot, which everybody has in their homes, and turned it into a fridge. He designed a box where the matka was on the top, and you put water there and you could drink the water. And in the box below that, you put fruit and vegetables, and they could stay fresh for up to 5 days. And that's about $30.
Cool.
So that's one example.
I actually, I don't know why the biryanis are always tastier when they're in that clay pot.
Yeah. So, so that's the other thing, is that people actually prefer, things that are in those, like the fruit and veg in that fridge. Actually, the clay fridge actually gets hydrated, whereas when you put fruit and veg in a fridge, they get dehydrated.
Dries. It
Mhm.
It
dries up.
dries. Yeah,
Yeah.
it gets desiccated. So that's one example. I'll give you another, perhaps more profound example. So I often show people. So the fridge example was thinking out of the cold box, and this one I
Okay.
call thinking out of the hot box. So I show people an incubator for babies, for infants, and it's a beautiful machine. I show them. It's a machine from GE. It has all the bells and whistles, and then I tell people that's $25,000. At that price, that machine is beyond the reach of most people living in countries like India, particularly those in rural areas where the clinics will not be able to afford those machines. And even if you give those machines to them, they may not have a technician there to maintain the machine, and they may not have access to electricity. And then I show them a baby warmer. It's like a blanket that the mother can use to swaddle the baby, but it also has a pad in there which has something called a phase change material. It's a waxy substance that you can heat with water or electricity, and it'll keep temperature fixed for a period of time. That baby warmer costs about $100. The incubator from GE is $25,000. This baby warmer is $100. Now, the baby warmer doesn't have an oxygen tent, it doesn't have some of the features that the incubator has, but it addresses a large part of the problem that the incubator is trying to solve. The problem of infant mortality, where if infants are born 1 or 2 weeks prematurely, they can't maintain their body temperature. The baby warmer would save them. And the other interesting thing was the baby warmer was not developed by a large company. It was developed by 4 students at Stanford who were taking a course called Design for Extreme Affordability. And that was the whole objective of the course, was to
Very
come up
cool.
with a work. So you actually have to incentivize and motivate people to think that way. And when you do it, they use their ingenuity to come up with these solutions.
So it's also looking at your marginalized market, right?
Except that, Sabrina, the tragedy is people we call marginalized are half the world's population.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, between 3 and 4 billion people live on less than $9 a day adjusted for PPP. So that's about $2 a day in reality. That's half the world's population.
Yeah.
And they are unserved by all these wonderful innovations that we have, particularly in the advanced world, but also in the cities in the developing world.
What
So,
about the
yes,
big
we call them
guys?
marginalized, but they're the mass of
Yeah.
the world's
Yeah.
population.
Yeah.
Right.
What about big companies like, I'm thinking Netflix. Like
Yeah,
Netflix had those CDs,
yeah,
DVDs, and
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
then they saw the streaming was going to take
yeah.
over. Apple with iTunes. Like, can you give us case studies of multinationals that we know and how do they use frugal innovation?
Yes,
Car
yes,
companies.
absolutely. So, initially, the first book which was called Jugaad Innovation, which was very specifically about emerging markets like India, and what Western multinationals coming to these markets could learn from their local counterparts. That book came out in 2012. But after that book came out, we realized that there was a lot of interest in the large Western corporations that I had been studying, who, I caricatured as doing this very structured, expensive type of innovation. They were interested in frugal innovation. So our second book, which Sabrina mentioned in the introduction, which is called Frugal Innovation, that came out in 2015. That was specifically about how large corporations were trying to do frugal innovation. And we opened that book with the example of Renault Nissan, very big automotive company based in France and Japan, led by the same very colorful CEO at that time, a guy called Carlos Ghosn, who you may have
We should
heard
talk
of.
about him. We should talk
Yes,
about him
I've
and his
met him,
escape.
by the way. Very impressive guy. I'll tell you
We'll
why.
talk about his
Because
escape.
yes, and he's a very smart guy, by the way, and that's probably how he managed to escape as well. Um, he in the 90s had started talking about something called frugal engineering within Renault Nissan, and his big idea was in the 90s. The fall of the Iron Curtain and the opening up of Eastern Europe. He had and his engineers had noticed that in countries like Romania, they had Soviet era cars that were highly affordable. However, of course, they hadn't kept up with technology and design. So he issued a challenge to his French engineers to work with Romanian engineers to come up with a 5,000 euro car that had all the latest advances in technology and design, but would be highly affordable. And initially, it was entirely for the Eastern European market, for Romania in particular. And they call this the Dacia line. And what happened was, initially, of course, it was very successful in Eastern Europe, but then it started to sell in Western Europe. And then at some point, it was accounting for something like 40% of their global sales. So
Wow.
they were sold on this idea of frugal innovation, and they went on to do more of this in India, for instance, where they developed an SUV called the Quid, which then sold for 5,000 euros. And his idea was, these engineers from resource constrained economies like Romania and India, they understand how to make do with limited resources. The French engineers are motivated by some challenge. Usually it's technology, the cutting edge technology. So he said, can I give them another challenge which will motivate them? How do you do something better, but within a serious constraint of, let's say, a ticket price of 5,000 euros? And they did that with the Renault Nissan, they did it with the Quid, they did it with the Dacia line, they did it with the Quid, and so on. So that's just one example of a large company doing this. I could tell you examples from many other sectors as well.
I want to hear them all. I mean, I feel like I'm in a
Okay.
lecture in
Okay.
Cambridge.
Okay.
I
I
didn't go
know
to
this
Okay.
is great.
Cambridge. I
Yeah.
went to King's, not Cambridge, but
Ah,
you know,
right.
uh, you know, bit
I
downgrade.
I'd like to know, how does social media play a role in frugal innovation?
Yeah.
Or does it?
So it does, absolutely. So you remember how I told you those students, four students came up with a baby warmer? They came up with it for their course. And then after that course, when they graduated from Stanford, they went on to set up a company. And they tested it with mothers and midwives. They made a lot of progress in Nepal and in India. They got venture capital backing from Stanford. They tested in the medical hospital, and then when they had to commercialize, they hit a wall. Social media could help them promote their product, because potentially you can do a Twitter campaign or a Kickstarter campaign. You can promote your product. So the barriers for startups to get the word out had fallen. But where they tripped up was they didn't have a sales force. So at that point, they partnered with GE Healthcare, and GE Healthcare's sales force helped them commercialize. So social media helped them get to a certain point which they wouldn't have been able to do before without a big advertising budget.
Okay.
But there's
Makes
another
sense.
example that I often give of another group of students from Northwestern in Chicago who did the whole process from coming up with an idea to developing a prototype to then manufacturing it to marketing it, including promoting it and distributing it, using things that are available to all of us, ubiquitous things. So they got the idea. This was a idea for hygiene in hospitals because they were interested in solving this problem of reducing hospital um, induced infections. The irony is sometimes people go to hospital to be cured, and then they get an infection there, and then they die
Mm-hmm.
Sure,
from
so
that
many.
infection. Yeah. So they said, they went and observed what doctors and nurses do, and then they realized that in their minds, the simplest thing would be to take, the wall unit, sometimes a gel that's somewhere, or on a wall somewhere, that the doctors were too busy to go to in between operations. So they went back to their studio and they brainstormed and they said, what if we take that unit and have it clip onto the doctors and nurses' uniforms? Then they can just dispense the gel as they're walking. So they developed a prototype in their studio, the minimum viable product, and then they outsourced the manufacturing to someone else. They use social media to promote themselves. They use Kickstarter to get the word out and get funding. And then they used Amazon to distribute it. So all the things needed to come up with an idea, develop a prototype, manufacture and market could be done using things that are available to all of us. And of course,
Already
social media
existing.
is an important part of that.
Yeah.
I want to come to your lectures,
Me
Yeah.
not to
too.
listen, but not to listen to you, to actually invest in the startups because you seem to inspire all the all the students to start these great creative ideas.
Well, I try to, but most of our students now, most of my students are in MBAs, and MBAs tend to want to go into big companies. So not all of them will be entrepreneurs. However, we have an entrepreneurship center in our business school, and that tries to encourage and promote and support students, and not just the business school students, but in a place like Cambridge, students who are studying, they might be PhDs or postdocs in the sciences or engineering or humanities or languages. We have people from the humanities who come on these courses, and these are the evenings on top of what they're normally doing. And there we actually then have an accelerator. If they have an idea, then we mentor and support them over a 13-week period to actually take their idea forward. And because in a place like Cambridge, you have the whole ecosystem. You have serial entrepreneurs who can advise and mentor them. You have angel investors, you have venture capitalists, you have big
Mm-hmm.
companies. We can help them, to learn from all these different people and accelerate that process of developing their idea and commercializing it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. How long
Speaking
have
of
you
big
been at
companies,
Cambridge? Sorry, how long have you been at Cambridge
I've been in
as a
Cambridge for a
professor?
very long time, actually, since '99. I started in '99. I went away for a few years to Imperial College in London, and then I returned in 2008. So,
Okay.
you know, for the most part, I've been in Cambridge since '99.
Imperial is where all the engineers go, Sabrina.
Okay.
I remember when I interviewed at Imperial, there were 20 people. There was one white person, three Indians, and the rest were all Asian, like Chinese, South Korean. It was quite hilarious. Anyway, you mentioned big companies. Uh, I read some of the reviews of your book that you co-authored, and I saw Indra Nui, the Pepsi ex-chairman. I saw Carlos Ghosh, the famous, now infamous, um, Renault CEO. He was the guru in the car industry, right? Until he was caught, or let's just say charged with using the money for personal reasons. No judgment over here. Then the Saatchi and Saatchi CEO, the GE, like some serious big people have written some nice words about you. Have you met these people? Does any of this mean anything
Yeah,
to you?
yeah, absolutely. So, I have met Carlos Ghosn. As I said, our case study of Renault, Nissan, and Dacia was the introductory chapter. We opened with that. And we, of course, interviewed various people in Renault Nissan. And then we got a private audience with the man himself. He gave us 1 hour
Wow.
in his office in Paris, and he was expansive. He was very open, and one of the things that I'll always remember about what he said was that he understood frugal innovation and engineering because he was of Lebanese extract, and he had grown up in Brazil. So he knew the emerging market mindset. he knew the mindset of consumers, which is about value for money. And so he brought that to a lot that Renault and Nissan did, and particularly to this whole initial project in Eastern Europe. And he said, many of the French engineers thought, okay, if we reduce the price, then the car has to be compact. And he said, no, 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 no. That's not the logic of the Romanian consumer. I could bet you that the typical Romanian consumer would want space to be able to put into his car his pig if he has a farm. That's the expression that was the example he gave. He must have known something about Romanian farmers. So, he had this emerging market mindset, and he said that that's what he had to constantly remind his French engineers about, that the mass of people in markets, particularly in the emerging world, are, as I said, the margins have to be low, but you get your profits through the volume. And if you can do that in emerging markets, you have a value proposition in developed markets as well.
Yeah. Can you explain to Sabrina how he escaped from Japan?
I actually don't know that whole story in great detail. That happened much after we met him and we interviewed him and after we wrote the book. So I
Yeah,
think
I
that's the
heard
subject of a movie.
Yeah, I think he hid inside a box inside a train, and
So he's
that's
clear.
how he
That's an
escaped the
example
country.
of Jugaad, by the way. That's a classic example
That's
of Jugaad. Lateral thinking when you desperately need to do something and it's really tricky. So this guy clearly is a very smart person, and he's very good at lateral thinking. And probably his years growing up in Brazil came to his aid in that situation.
that is funny.
Now
Which
he's a
country?
criminal, but okay.
Yeah. Which developed countries do you feel are still way behind when it comes to this principle?
It's very interesting. So in Asia, I'd say that the country that's most interested in what we've been doing is Japan.
Okay.
And that could be because in Asia, it's the most advanced economy. And it has, I think, forgotten its frugal roots. So all countries, when they grow frugally. They have limited resources. The mass of their people are in low incomes. They have to do affordable things. And then people's incomes, their economy grows, incomes go up. And then they want more sophisticated things and they can pay for them. And Japan went through exactly that cycle that subsequently other Asian economies have gone through, starting with South Korea and Taiwan and Singapore and Hong Kong, and then China to some extent, and now possibly India to some extent, Indonesia, Malaysia, etc. But the Japanese have become so rich and so affluent that they have become very process oriented, so that caricature of that corporation that has big budgets, it's all about R&D, it's all about technology for the sake of technology, it's expensive, you have high margins, low volumes. That holds for Japan. But they desperately want to know about frugal innovation because their big growth markets are in countries like India and China and so on,
Yeah.
and
But
they're being
Sabrina,
outcompeted by the Chinese and Indians.
I think Sabrina,
Right.
correct me if I'm wrong. Your question was more in terms of America, France, Germany, like the developed
No, overall,
countries.
I was thinking developed countries, but I mean, we can add your question now.
No,
Yeah.
I just want to know like which country is like behind, like which one is so rich doesn't even think of frugal innovation as a thing.
Well, my feeling is that now all countries are on board with frugal innovation for a very different reason than the one that's driving emerging markets towards it. So in emerging markets, it's driven by the fact that the mass of people are on lower incomes and you have to be affordable to reach them, and then you make your profits. In developed economies, it's not so much about the incomes, but the constraints are coming from resources, climate, and the fact that um, we have limited, especially if you're using fossil fuels, there's a limit to how much we can use. There are, of course, emissions that we have to think about. But for instance, a company like IKEA, that was another company we interviewed for our book and I've continued to study. They told us very clearly their interest in frugal innovation was driven by the fact that their entire business model and business is dependent on a resource that is scarce and non renewable and likely to get scarcer, timber. And so in 10 years' time, there are not going to be as much timber as there is today, and there'll be more people wanting that to get their hands on it. So that has forced them to become frugal in the sense of, for instance, adopting circular models, circular business models, where they'll reduce, reuse, and recycle all of that scarce resource. And to do that, they'll have to move from a transactional model where they sell these things to us and lose control of the asset to where they lease this and keep control of the asset so they can reclaim them at the right time to reuse them or recycle
Did I
It's
read correctly
fascinating.
that that IKEA sells more meatballs than any other
them.
person in the world,
Quite
and that I
possible
believe,
because
yeah. Sorry, carry on.
no, quite possible because their footfall is amazing. They have these massive stores, but even
Yeah.
there they've had to adapt. So in countries like India, people are not able to go out of town, to massive stores. So they have smaller stores which are in town.
Do they in India?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
But like, I think they're like food courts. People go there to eat as opposed to
yeah.
shop.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
because you go for a whole day, it's a trek, it's an expedition, it could be a picnic. You take the family and you camp out there because they're massive, they're outside of town, and you spend your whole day there. So, you got to eat when you're with your kids and your
It's
family.
very overwhelming.
Yeah, it's quite
Very.
overwhelming.
There's too
It's
much
quite
stuff
overwhelming.
everywhere.
Yeah,
But we go
yeah.
I have to go in with the right mindset,
You have to go into the right mindset. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let you know when I go to an IKEA. Um, Jaideep, we ask all our guests. This one will be. I'm really intrigued about your answer. We
Hmm.
ask all our guests what their definition of success is, and whether it's evolved over the last few decades. What is
Yeah.
your
So,
definition?
you asking me personally?
Yes, personally.
Yeah, so my definition of success has evolved hugely over the years. So I've been an academic throughout my, adult life. So I went straight from undergraduate to masters and PhD, and then started teaching in universities in the US, Netherlands, and the UK. And initially I was very narrow-minded in what I wanted to do and what I was told to do, which was, establish my academic reputation. It was all about publishing academic papers and getting a name for myself. But over time, I became, and as I said, I became more interested in emerging markets like India, where I'd grown up, and I wanted to connect with India. And I think that has made me think much more about people who are not as fortunate as I have been. And this whole you asked me at the beginning what was my why this obsession or fascination with Jugaad or Frugal, because to me the big challenge that we all face is how are we going to improve the lives of those people. Sabrina, you said were marginal. Yes, they are in a sense
Yeah.
marginal,
Yeah.
but that's 3.5 billion people. Most of them are in countries like India. How are we going to improve their lives, get them up to a certain standard, but do that without breaking the planet? We can't have those economies grow and develop in the way that the Western economies develop, because that was so dependent on the fossil fuel and this linear economy of taking from nature, making and dumping back in nature. We have to move to a different circular model. So that to me is fascinating, and it's such an existential challenge. How do we do that as a planet? How do we do right by people who are not as fortunate as us, who are still in some ways living in a 19th century world, but do it
Yeah.
in a way that we don't bankrupt the whole planet?
Yep. I think Sabrina and I will never use the word marginalized again.
Well, in a way, they are marginalized. I've used that word too. But the irony is that they are also a majority in a way. But they're not taken
Yeah.
seriously by governments or big companies, or the media in a way. They're a silent majority, you might say.
You still think so, even in today's
I
day and
still think
age?
so. I still think so. I'm in India at the moment, and you just have to go on the street to see that. So I was in Gurgaon. Just I'm now in Bangalore, but yesterday I was in Gurgaon, and I went to a very nice university, India's top university, Ashoka University, which is a bit on the outskirts of Delhi. And then I was going to the airport, and around me were all these high-rise buildings, India on the move, all these cars on the freeways and so on. And
Yeah.
I looked out of my window and I saw this guy. He was a young man. He must have been in his 30s, but he looked much older than that because he's been beaten down by his life. And he was walking in the heat. He was walking right next to on a flyover. I don't know how much he would have had to walk, to get to where he was. And he just had some, a dirty bag strung over his shoulder, and he was picking up things from the side of the road, like plastic bottles.
Hmm.
You see that all the time, and that's in cities. So you can imagine what it's like in villages, and
Yeah,
that's
Yeah.
it's
just
true.
in India. That's so that reality is repeated in other Asian countries, that's in other African countries, that's in Latin American countries. So
Yeah.
You
I
know,
think it's still the case.
you read marginalized demographic when it comes to economies, but then when I said it and then you responded, it's like there is that negative connotation.
I feel the
And
same way.
I
Like,
had to hear it from you to realize
yeah,
that.
I
Yeah.
I feel like I felt everyone was equal, except when I see what's happening with Israel and the Palestinians, and the way the people are being treated in Gaza. That's hit me hard. That's hit me that, wow, people really are not treated fairly around the world. And it's like Israel and America now. I feel like TikTok and the world is against America and Israel for what's happening down there. So I hear what you're saying, that
Hmm.
people are no longer treated the same, or never were treated the
They
same.
never were. Yeah.
Well, I also
But
think there's a structural inequality, so you can have inequality in a rich country where, some people are billionaires and a lot of people are, just managing to get by. But I think that's obviously needs to be taken seriously. That's relative, poverty. But you have absolute poverty, which is people who are living in a 19th century world surrounded by people in the 21st century. And possibly the only thing they have that is 21st century is this in their pocket,
yeah,
the smartphone. In a
Yeah.
country like
that,
India, many people have this, but that's probably the only 21st century technology they have with them.
but thanks to Mukesh Ambani and Geo,
Yes,
who
that's true.
actually his neighbor, Mukesh Ambani's neighbor, a street away from Altamont Road, is actually a slum and poor people.
It's Amit. That's wonderful. You brought up the Ambanis and Geo, because their father Dhirubhai Ambani was
Yeah,
truly, he had that vision of frugal innovation. He said to his sons when they were getting into telecommunications, he asked them, "What do you think we are competing with in a country like India?" And they thought of various things, landline, etc. He said, "No, no, we are competing with the postage stamp." And how much is the postage stamp? The cheapest postage stamp at that time was 5 paisa. You know,
yeah, nothing, a
nothing.
cent.
He said
Yeah.
that's what we're competing with. And if we can get the price of a call or a minute or data down to that, you have the market. Until you
Wow.
do that, you don't have the market. And then when they did Geo, I'm sure that was the vision. And
Well,
that, yeah,
Anil first started, and he obviously went through his
yeah,
financial issues,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah,
Mukesh now
yeah,
with Geo has
yeah,
found
yeah,
the
yeah,
solution,
exactly.
with 4G and 5G
Yeah,
at the prices
yeah,
that he's offering
yeah,
it. And I've spoken about Dhirubhai Ambani and what a role model he is.
yeah.
He is, and
Extraordinary.
the way he actually got retail investors to invest
Yeah,
in his companies and open up the capital markets.
absolutely.
But I also have criticized him for not doing a proper will.
Oh, yes. Okay, yes. Yeah, that is a very Indian thing, isn't it? Maybe a
Yeah, but
global thing
True.
too. Yeah,
it has to be addressed, right? I
yeah,
find
yeah,
so many
absolutely.
Indian families today
Yeah,
are not talking because the grandfathers thought that the sons would
we'll
split
sort it
everything
out.
half half,
Right.
and then one does well,
Yeah,
one doesn't do well, or one
yeah,
marries one woman from another family, and the problems start.
yeah,
Anyway, we can go on an hour talking about that.
yeah,
Let's
yeah,
move
yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah,
Jaideep, you are obviously a big reader.
yeah.
I can see without having met you. What 2 3 books do you recommend or do you gift that I, I say 2 3 books because I'm sure your list must be 100, but give us your 2 3 books that have made an impact in your life that you would recommend.
Okay, so a book that is very influential for me personally, and I think it's made a big difference in India, is a book called Imagining India by someone called Nanda Nilekani. So if you haven't heard of Nanda Nilekani, you should
he
read
he
a.
he No, Nandan Nadikalin, he sounds very familiar. What's his company?
So he was one of the founders of Infosys,
Okay, no wonder.
and
Yeah,
they pioneered BPO in the 90s.
yeah,
He was the CEO in the mid 2000s of Infosys, And
Yeah.
he gave Thomas Friedman of the New York Times the title of his book on globalization, The World is Flat. It was when Thomas Friedman was at visiting Infosys, and Nandan was showing him around the campus. They happened to go into their very big conference hall where there's a massive screen, a big wall with all these TVs, where people from different parts of the world would show up for meetings. And as they entered the hall, the screen was lighting up. And Nandan said to Thomas Friedman, "Look, Tom, the world is flat." And that's how he got that title.
Ah,
So
I
Nandan,
yeah. No,
Nandan,
I said him, Azim Premji.
Azim
These
Premji,
guys are
yeah, yeah,
obviously
yeah,
gurus
gurus.
of the Indian. Yeah.
But what makes Nandan particularly remarkable, Amit, is that after he stepped down as CEO, he wrote this book, Imagining India, in 2008 or so. And there he looked at some of the, we were talking about the structural problems, the structural inequalities that Indians have. And he suggested some very simple solutions. One of those was for this problem that, the Indian government has a lot of schemes and benefits for people who are marginalized, as we were saying earlier, people who live in rural areas, low incomes. They have lots of schemes. But the irony is, those people who the schemes are intended for in 2008, they couldn't claim those benefits because they didn't have a form of ID. They couldn't prove
oh,
who they
wow.
were. They didn't even
Okay.
have a birth certificate. This
Yeah.
is the
This
kind
is
of
before the
structural.
Aadhaar card.
This
Yeah.
is, and his solution was the Aadhaar.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to solve two problems. One is those who were these benefits were intended for could claim the benefits by proving who they were, and the other benefit was that would reduce fraud. There was so much fake. There were so many fake IDs in the system. It would eliminate those at one go. So this person is truly remarkable. He has done many other things that I've written about in this space of digital public infrastructure. And he's
Yeah.
been at the forefront of a revolution, bringing people who are outside the formal economy in India into the formal economy through their mobile phones and mobile payments, through their Aadhaar card and digital bank accounts and mobile payments. So
Yeah.
he's
This reminds me.
remarkable.
Yeah, this
Go
reminds
ahead.
me when Modi overnight uh, said, I don't know what rupee note it was, but basically
Demonetization.
all the
Oh,
what was
yeah.
it, 500 rupees, 1,000 rupees? I
Yeah, it
forgot
was a
the
thousand
Yeah.
rupees.
details. But
Thousand
I
rupees.
thought
Out of
I thought when
circulation
he
or done.
yeah, I thought when he announced that overnight, I thought that was the end of him. I thought
Yeah,
someone was going to go and just kill him, or some developer was going to go and like, I don't know. I
yeah,
thought that was the end of him, and look at him now. He's the most
yeah,
powerful man in the world, next
yeah.
to Vladimir Putin,
And
arguably.
that reminded me of here in the US in the last election where the Democratic Party was trying to get, the lower income individuals to come and vote, right? Again, no ID, no voter registration. And
Yeah,
so that became
yeah.
a big
And
issue during that time.
during COVID, the U.S. federal government was cutting checks. It was writing checks to people,
Yeah.
and that was taking time. And there was a lot of fraud. In
Yeah.
India, they were sending the money directly into bank accounts of the
Bank
beneficiary
account.
linked to their
Okay.
unique ID, digital ID, and people could claim it
Mm,
instantaneously through their phone. That's
Hmm.
that's leapfrog, and that is Nanda Nilekani. So
Yep.
he's definitely one person. Another very remarkable person, and there are a couple of books about him that you could read, but it's the person who influenced me was a gentleman called Sir Fazle Hassan Abid. He's Bangladeshi. He was, of course, born in East Pakistan. And he, in 1971, when Bangladesh got independence, started an organization called BRAC, BRAC. I didn't know about BRAC until 2012 when I went to visit, and I'm a bit ashamed that I didn't know about BRAC. Truly remarkable organization, started by Sir Fazle. It's the world's largest NGO. In Bangladesh, it's practically a parallel government because they do primary education, primary health, microfinance, social enterprise across the country at scale, and huge proponents of frugal innovation. In fact, that was the point of connection between me and Sir Fazle. He was a master of frugal innovation. He had done it extensively in his career at BRAC. Unfortunately, he passed away last year. but a remarkable person. These are two people I always talk about when people ask me this question of who's influenced me.
Speaking
Great.
of remarkable people, I wanted quickly, before we get into the rapid fire, your opinion on Sabrina's friend, Vivek Ramaswamy.
He's
Oh,
not
is
my
he a
friend.
friend of yours, Sabrina?
No, he's not. And I'm actually politically, I'm not a fan. Um, so and so he teases me about it because he was a big fan and thought he'd
Oh,
win the US election.
were
And
you?
I said, "You are out of your mind. This guy will not win."
I know. My point is, I find the two guys who are currently going to fight it out, both of them should not be eligible for age, for
Yeah,
tax, for whatever reason. But anyway, just
for
quickly, your thoughts on Vivek.
criminal acts.
I
Good
used to
man, bad
follow
man.
a guy on Twitter who used to spoof Vivek. I'm a fan of his.
Yes. There's
Well,
another
who
one
is
I
it?
follow on
Who is it on
Instagram.
I don't
Twitter?
know. I don't know the guy's name. He's on TikTok. He just does a great Vivek Ramaswamy, and he does that to Vivek Ramaswamy. He's met him.
Oh, oh,
It's
I've
just
seen the
hilarious.
videos.
He's
Yeah, the young
hilarious.
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
got
yeah,
it. Okay, rapid fire.
yeah.
Jaideep, from a time perspective, we're going to go very fast.
Sure.
We're going to ask a question, whatever comes to the top of your mind. I'll
Yeah.
start. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Empathy.
Empathy. That seems to be a theme lately with our guests. I like it.
I was thinking
Um,
flying, invisibility, but okay,
Speaking
yeah, we'll go with
speaking
empathy.
Spanish fluently.
Okay.
ah.
Sabrina, I
Okay,
have a superpower.
Yeah.
if you could meet any historical figure, who would it be?
Oh, Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah.
By the way, not to plug our pod, but we did a podcast recently with Dr. Anand Bang. It's in YouTube under Indian Explorers, and he shares his family stories with Mahatma Gandhi. And Sabrina and I were blown
Wow.
away,
If
Wow.
you get
Wow.
a
honestly.
chance, watch it. It's
Okay, will
fascinating.
do.
Yeah.
Will do.
Yeah.
Great family.
Okay. Since you are a marketing guru, if you had to describe your personal brand in 5 words or less, what would your tagline be?
Serve the customer.
Okay.
Sounds like McDonald's, but okay.
Yeah.
Which is a great one.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of that, what's your favorite marketing campaign you've seen of all time?
We mentioned the Aadhaar, amazing marketing campaign, especially for something that was coming from a government and particularly the government of India. Very savvy marketing campaign.
Oh,
Oh,
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
we've not seen it, so we'd have to find that.
Including the brand and everything and how they communicated. People were lining up to get this. They were
Fantastic.
lining up to get it.
That's great.
All right. What have you changed your mind about in the last year or two that you thought A and now you thought the opposite?
Wow. That's a tough one. What have I
We didn't
changed
say
my
this would
mind?
be easy. We didn't say
Yeah.
this would be easy.
Hmm. Okay, so I do a lot of work on sustainability. I mentioned the connection, and you know, uh, I I think that I think I've become more accepting of some of the fossil fuel companies and the car companies. I think that it's not easy because this is because I've interviewed people who are on the sustainability side in these companies, and I
Yeah.
can see that it's not a straightforward thing for them to do. Why?
Okay.
Because we have to keep the lights on. If you take a country like the UK and you take a company like say BP, they can't just shut down sales of natural gas. Of course, it makes a lot of financial sense for them to sell it, but equally, they couldn't shut it down tomorrow because they need to keep the lights on. So all of us would suffer. So they continue to do that, but they also invest in renewables and so on, and it's going to take
Okay.
time. So I think I've just become more patient with those big companies that are trying to make that transition.
Got it.
Okay. And that's impressive you say that when you're in a city right now with extreme heat.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's not normal.
yeah, yeah.
So,
So my inclination would have been to be very critical of them, but
yeah.
Well,
having talked to them, and I suppose this is the downside of empathy. When you talk to people and you understand their perspective and you see the world from their perspective, then you see the world from their perspective.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, India is investing big time in
Oh,
renewable
India
energy,
is,
but it's
but
going to take
India will
time.
only achieve net zero by 2070. And the question is, will we be around till then? And who will
Yeah.
be around?
Not me, not me and
We
Sabrina.
might fry before then.
Okay, last question. What self purchase under $100 has made a significant impact in your life?
Okay, it's not under $100, but it's thereabouts. It's something called Zoe, and this is a help app, a food app. It's was set up and it's being run by a bunch of people at King's College, London, I believe. You can check that out. It might be King's or UC. I think it's King's. It's King's.
Good
A
college,
guy
good
called Tim.
college.
It's a guy called Tim Spector with university in the US. I don't remember which one. Anyway,
How do you
the
spell that?
point
Zoe?
ZOE. Apparently, it's
Okay.
Zoe.
Greek for life. So
Okay.
this has made a huge difference to me because I had very, like many Indians, I had very high blood sugar and very high cholesterol, particularly the bad type. So much so, the State Bank of India declined my application for life insurance. That really shook me because they give everybody life insurance. And so, what Zoe does is, you put a little sensor under your arm. You just stick it under your arm for 2 weeks, and then you can see your blood sugar literally real time, depending on what you eat. So you realize what's good and bad for you. You don't want spikes. So anything that gives you spikes and a dip is bad for you. They also then do a blood test and they can look at how your body processes fat, and that's, of course, what determines your cholesterol. And they also do a poop sample, so they see what bacteria are in your gut and what are the good
Mhm.
bacteria you have and what's the bad bacteria. And then, based on those three things, your personal profile, any food, the app will give you a score. Any food and even any recipe, if you put in what the ingredients are and the quantities, it'll give you a score from 0 to 100, personalized, for how good or bad that is for you. So 100 is good, 0 is bad, avocado is 100, um, uh, soda is bad, 0, sugary drinks are bad. And I did that for a month. And actually, frankly, you don't even need to do the app because basically the bottom line is eat the rainbow or eat 50
Yeah.
different veggies in a week. And by veggies, I mean vegetables, fruit, nuts, lentils, that kind of stuff. I did that for a month and I did a blood test again. And I had my GP said
Changed
your
dramatically.
indicators are good. So, that's
Fantastic.
made a huge difference.
Sounds like an ad for Zoe, or sounds like we should be investing in Zoe.
Yeah.
Or an ad
Well,
for Frugal Innovation because, very simple to do this, huge impact, not very expensive.
I thought this was so fascinating, and I would love to take your class. I just don't want to do the homework and take the exams, but I want to sit there and soak it all in. And Jugaad, that is a term I am going to teach my daughter today when she gets home from school. I
We're
love
Indian.
it.
We're born with it. We're born with it,
Yeah,
Sabrina.
I
don't just
know.
teach her
Apparently.
the
No,
word, let her practice it.
the action. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to remind
Jaideep,
her.
um, do you want to leave, I don't know, an Instagram handle, an email, or something? Do you want people to reach out to you, or
Sure, sure. LinkedIn is probably the best.
okay,
Just Jaideep Prabhu at LinkedIn. You can
okay,
find me there. Um, um, I think I have an Instagram thing. I don't use it that often. I think it's JC Prabhu. I'm also
okay,
on TikTok, but I don't use that much.
okay?
That's
Well, if you
where I
don't
go
mind,
to. That's where I
we're
go
gonna
to see
tag your
spoofs
book.
of Vivek Ramaswamy.
Got it. We're gonna tag your book as well on Amazon on our show notes, if that's
Oh,
okay with you.
wonderful! Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Uh,
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure.
yeah.
Really enjoyed this conversation, and
Same here.
I look forward to actually meeting you in person next time I'm in the UK.
Same
I'll
here.
reach out.
Same here. Absolutely. Please do that, both of you. I'd love to meet you. I'll
Absolutely.
show you around Cambridge. I'll take you punting on the cam. All those kinds of things. Just make sure you come when the weather is good, which is basically 2 months of the year.
A pint at the
Yeah.
local beer at the local brewery is good enough.
Or on the punt while
On the
I'm
pint.
chauffeuring you on the river.
Sounds good. Thanks, JD. Pleasure.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone. This has been another episode of Indian Explorers, a very educational one. We hope you enjoyed it just like we did. Have a great day, everyone.